My name's Vance, and if you'd told me a month ago that I'd be packing a bag at 3 a.m., leaving the house I'd built with my wife of 25 years, I'd have laughed in your face. But here I am, 49 years old, walking out on the only woman I ever loved, Nora. We met in college. She was the spark that lit up the room, always full of life and a little bit of chaos. We dated for nearly few years before getting married. I thought we had it all, a strong partnership, 2 amazing kids, and a life most people would envy. But I was wrong. So wrong. It all started with the alumni reunion. Every year, our college throws this massive shindig for classes celebrating 25, 30, or 35 years since graduation. This year, it was our turn to shine. Nora was ecstatic. She'd spent weeks planning her outfit and scrolling through Facebook to see who might show up. We walked into the banquet hall arm in arm, and for a while, it felt perfect. The old gang was there, and we were laughing like we were 20 again. Then he showed up. Barney. I should have known the night would take a turn when I saw his face. Barney had been Nora's persistent admirer back in the day, the kind of guy who doesn't take a hint no matter how many times you say, "not interested." To my knowledge, Nora always dismissed him. But Barney? He never gave up. Even after we got married, he sent a cringy email saying she'd made a mistake choosing me over him. So there he was, 25 years later, grinning like he owned the place. He walked up to us, arms open wide like we were old buddies. "Vance, Nora, wow, look at you two, still together after all these years," he said, his voice dripping with fake warmth. "Nora, you haven't aged a day," she laughed nervously. "Barney, it's been ages. How are you?" And just like that, the night began to unravel. I should have seen it coming, but hindsight's 20/20, right? Barney slid into our group like he belonged there, chatting up everyone and laughing at his own jokes. I kept my cool at first. Hell, I even cracked a few jokes myself. But then I noticed how his eyes kept darting back to Nora. It wasn't subtle either. At one point, while I was talking to a friend, I caught him leaning in a little too close to her. She laughed at something he said, and I swear I felt my stomach twist. Not jealousy exactly, but a gut instinct that something was off. After dinner, we moved to the dance floor. The band was playing throwback hits, and everyone was cutting loose. Nora dragged me out for a slow dance, and for a moment, it felt like old times. Her head on my shoulder, my arms around her. It was like the rest of the world disappeared. But then Barney showed up again. "Mind if I cut in?" he asked, grinning like a kid who just got away with stealing cookies. I was about to say no, but Nora smiled and said, "Of course, Vance won't mind." Before I could protest, she was in his arms, laughing at something he whispered in her ear. I watched them for a minute, trying to tell myself it was nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. The way she smiled at him, it wasn't the polite, "I'm humoring you" smile. It was softer, warmer. When the song ended, I pulled Nora aside. "What the hell was that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" she replied, tilting her head like I was the one being unreasonable. "You let Barney waltz in like he's your prom date," I said, my frustration bubbling over. "You know how he used to feel about you. Hell, he made it obvious back then, and now he's doing it again." Nora rolled her eyes. "Vance, you're overreacting. He's just being friendly. It's been decades. I think we can all move on, don't you?" I wanted to push back, but something in her tone stopped me. She sounded defensive, sure, but there was also something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Fine," I muttered. "Let's just get through the night." I tried to shake it off, but the knot in my stomach didn't go away, especially not when I saw Nora and Barney talking again later, heads close together, as if the rest of the party didn't exist. The rest of the night was a blur of forced smiles and awkward small talk. I tried to lose myself in conversations with old friends, but my eyes kept drifting back to Nora and Barney. They weren't dancing anymore, just standing off to the side, deep in conversation. Occasionally she'd laugh at something he said, that same soft laugh that used to be just for me. After a while, I couldn't take it. I decided to step outside for some air. The cool night breeze hit my face, grounding me a little. I leaned against the railing, staring out into the darkness, trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things. Maybe it was just nostalgia, old friends catching up, nothing more. But then I saw them. Through the large windows of the banquet hall, I caught a glimpse of Nora and Barney slipping out through a side door. My heart dropped. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but my feet were already moving. I followed at a distance, careful not to be seen. They walked across the college lawn, the same place where we'd shared so many memories during our time there. I kept my distance, watching as Barney leaned in closer, his hand brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. Unbelievable, I muttered under my breath. My chest tightened as I turned and walked back toward the building, not sure what to do next. I wanted to confront them, but a part of me wasn't ready to hear whatever excuse Nora might have. When I got back inside, I decided to keep my head down for the rest of the night. I avoided Nora and Barney, sticking with friends who were too drunk or too distracted to notice anything was wrong. Eventually, Nora reappeared, looking flustered. Her hair was slightly out of place, and there was a strange, distant look in her eyes. "Ready to go?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. "Sure," I said, keeping my tone flat. I didn't want to have this conversation here in front of everyone. The car ride home was silent. Nora stared out the window, and I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When we got home, she headed straight to bed without a word. I sat in the living room staring at the clock, my mind racing with 100 questions. At around 2 a.m., she came downstairs. Her face was pale, her eyes red and puffy. She sat down next to me on the couch, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. "I have to tell you something," she finally whispered. I stared at her, my heart pounding. I didn't say anything, didn't try to make it easier for her. She shifted uncomfortably, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "Vance," she began, her voice shaky. "I don't even know where to start." "How about the truth?" I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "That seems like a good place." She winced, and for a moment I thought she might back out. But then she took a deep breath and looked me in the eyes. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice cracking. "Tonight, I let things go too far with Barney." The words hit me like a freight train. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Too far?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "What does that mean, Nora?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "We kissed," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "It didn't mean anything, Vance. I was caught up in the moment, in the nostalgia." I stood up, unable to sit still. "It didn't mean anything?" I repeated, pacing the room. "You disappear with Barney, the guy who's been obsessed with you for decades, and now you're telling me it didn't mean anything? Are you kidding me?" She broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I'm so sorry, Vance," she choked out. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I love you. Please, you have to believe me." I stopped pacing and stared at her, my mind racing. This woman, the woman I'd loved, trusted, and built a life with, had betrayed me. And she was sitting there, crying and begging for forgiveness, like that would erase what she'd done. "I need some air," I said, grabbing my coat. I couldn't look at her anymore. The weight of her confession was too much. "Don't wait up." I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring as my mind replayed the events of the night. I kept asking myself how we'd gotten here. How had the woman I'd loved for 25 years ended up in the arms of another man? By the time I got home, the sun was starting to rise. Nora was asleep on the couch, clutching a blanket like it was the only thing holding her together. I stood there for a moment, watching her, trying to remember the last time I'd felt like I really knew her. But all I could see was Barney's smug grin and the way she'd looked at him on the dance floor. I knew then that things would never be the same. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. The next morning I dragged myself into the kitchen, running on nothing but anger and caffeine. Nora was already there, sitting at the table, staring into her coffee like it held the answers to the universe. "We need to talk," I said, dropping into the chair across from her. She looked up, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. "I know," she whispered. "Why, Nora?" I asked, my voice tight. Why Barney? Of all people, why him? She sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she fiddled with her wedding ring. It wasn't about him, Vance, she said softly. It's just, I don't know. It's like, I've been stuck. We've been stuck. Stuck? I repeated, my chest tightening. We've built a life together, Nora, a family, a home. How is that stuck? Her head snapped up, and for the first time since last night, her eyes had fire in them. That's just it, Vance, she snapped. We are stuck. You're so comfortable in your little routine, work, dinner, TV, bed, and I'm just supposed to go along with it? Meanwhile, Barney's out there living his life. He's traveled the world. He's started businesses. He's accomplished so much. I stared at her in disbelief. You're comparing me to Barney? The guy who spent decades obsessing over a woman who didn't want him? That's your benchmark for success? Her face twisted into a sneer. At least he's not a loser, Vance. At least he has ambition. What have you done with your life? Huh? What have we done? You're just coasting, and I'm supposed to be okay with that? Her words cut deeper than any betrayal ever could. I felt my hands clench into fists under the table, but I forced myself to stay calm. A loser, I repeated, my voice eerily quiet. That's what you think of me? She opened her mouth to respond, but closed it again, realizing too late that she'd gone too far. Vance, I didn't mean— Yes, you did, I interrupted, my voice cold. You meant every word. I pushed back from the table and stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I hope Barney's ambition keeps you warm at night, I said bitterly, because I'm done being your punching bag. Vance, wait, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean it. I was angry, but I was already walking away. I went upstairs, grabbed a bag, and stuffed it with essentials. Before I left, I scrawled a quick note on a piece of paper and left it on the kitchen counter. Nora, you've made it clear how you feel. I'm done. Don't call me. Don't text me. I'll reach out when I'm ready, if I ever am. I walked out the door without looking back. I didn't go far at first, just checked into a quiet motel a couple of towns over. I needed time to think, to process everything without her shadow looming over me. I turned off my phone, blocked Nora on every platform, and vowed not to check my emails. For once in my life, I needed to disappear. But the silence didn't last long. 3 days in, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages. I ignored most of them, but when I saw my son Jake's name pop up, I couldn't bring myself to let it go to voicemail. Hey, Dad, he said, his voice cautious. Are you okay? Mom's freaking out. She said you just up and vanished. She's talking about calling the cops to file a missing person report. I let out a bitter laugh. She's playing the victim now, huh? Dad, what's going on? Jake pressed. She won't tell us anything except that you left without a word. She's crying all the time. Emily's worried sick. Emily, my daughter. She's 20, just starting her junior year of college. Jake, at 22, is in grad school. They're good kids, smart, kind, everything I could have hoped for. And now, thanks to Nora, they were being dragged into this mess. I'm fine, I said, keeping my voice steady. You don't need to worry about me. Dad, Jake said again, his tone firm. We deserve to know what's going on. Did something happen between you and Mom? I hesitated for a moment. They were adults, sure, but how much did they need to know? Then I remembered Nora's words, her disdain, and the way she'd tried to shift the blame for her actions onto me. My anger bubbled to the surface. Fine, I said sharply. You want to know? Your mother found herself a new love. Barney, the guy who's been sniffing around her since college. She couldn't resist his charm, I guess. There was silence on the other end. Then Jake spoke, his voice tight. What are you saying, Dad? I'm saying, I said, that your mother decided I wasn't enough for her anymore. That's why I left. Emily's voice broke in, shaky and uncertain. She must have been listening on speaker. Dad, are you sure? Maybe it's not what it seems. She told me herself, Em, I interrupted, my voice softer now. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I just need you both to understand why I'm gone." They didn't say anything for a moment, and I could feel their confusion, their hurt through the phone. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Look, I know this is hard to hear, but I need you both to do me a favor. Tell your mother not to look for me. She'll hear from my lawyer soon enough." "Lawyer?" Jake asked, his voice rising. "Dad, are you talking about divorce?" "Yeah," I said simply. "It's over, Jake." Emily started crying softly in the background, and my chest tightened. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice heavy with regret. "I never wanted this for you guys. But this is how it has to be." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. The anger was still there, but now it was joined by a deep, aching sadness. I hated that my kids had to be dragged into this, but there was no way around it. They deserved to know the truth. The next day, I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. I spent hours poring over paperwork, outlining everything, our assets, the years we'd spent together, and what needed to be done to split it all. As I signed the initial documents, a strange sense of finality settled over me. This was really happening. I sent Nora a final message through the lawyer. "From now on, all communication goes through my attorney. Don't contact me directly." It was harsh, but necessary. I wasn't ready to face her again, and I doubted I ever would be. A month later, the day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was small and sterile, the kind of place that made even the simplest legal proceedings feel monumental. Nora sat at the opposite end of the table, her head held high, her expression a careful mask of neutrality. She didn't look at me, not even once. I wasn't sure what I expected. Tears, an apology, maybe even one last attempt to patch things up. But no, if she felt anything at all, she hid it well. Her silence spoke volumes. The proceedings were straightforward. I'd made it clear from the start that I wasn't out for revenge. I wanted a fair split, half the money from our accounts and a portion of the value of the house. Nora could keep the house itself, along with all the furniture, the memories, and the life we'd built there. I didn't want it anymore. The judge signed off on the agreement without much fuss. In less than an hour, it was over. The gavel came down, and just like that, 25 years of marriage were reduced to a few sheets of paper. As we walked out of the courtroom, I stopped in the hallway, waiting to see if she'd say anything. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes cold and distant, before walking away without a word. No goodbye, no closure, just silence. The first thing I did after the divorce was finalized was book a flight. I needed to get away, far away from everything that reminded me of Nora, Barney, and the life I thought I had. With the money from the settlement, I had enough to travel comfortably for a while. I spent the next 2 months hopping between countries, Italy, Japan, New Zealand, anywhere that felt as far removed from home as possible. I explored ancient ruins, hiked through stunning landscapes, and ate meals that made me forget, if only for a moment, how bitter everything tasted back home. But no matter where I went, her words followed me. Loser. That single word echoed in my head every time I looked in the mirror. I tried to push it away, to remind myself of everything I'd accomplished, my career, my kids, the life I'd built, but the anger wouldn't let go. One rainy afternoon in Paris, I got a call from Emily. "Dad, when are you coming back?" she asked, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "Soon," I promised. "Why? What's up?" I want to see you," she said hesitantly. "Can we meet when you're back?" "Of course," I said, my heart softening at the thought of my little girl. "I'll let you know when I land." 2 weeks later, I was sitting across from her in a cozy little cafe downtown. "Dad," she said, smiling as she gave me a hug. "You look good." "Thanks, kiddo," I said, pulling out a chair for her. "You're not looking too shabby yourself." She laughed, setting her things down and ordering a latte. Once the server left, she leaned in. "So, how's life? Traveling the world? Eating great food? Must be rough." I grinned. "It's been good for me. I needed to get away, clear my head. I've hiked mountains, walked through ancient cities, and eaten things I can't even pronounce. It's been freeing." Emily smiled, but there was something behind her eyes, a hesitation, like she was working up to something. "I'm glad you're doing okay," she said softly. "You deserve it." "And you?" I asked, tilting my head. "How's school, work, life?" She shrugged. "Busy, but good. School's intense, and I'm interning at a non-profit now, so that keeps me on my toes." She hesitated, then added, Mom's not doing great." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" Emily glanced down at her cup, swirling the foam with her spoon. "She's kind of a mess, Dad. I don't think she's really bounced back from the divorce. And—" She paused, her voice dropping. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but, well, you might want to hear it." I leaned forward, my curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Emily sighed, clearly trying to choose her words carefully. "A while back I overheard Mom talking to one of her friends. They didn't know I was home. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but they were loud." "And?" I prompted, my stomach tightening. She hesitated, then said, "She started dating Barney after the divorce." I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. "You're kidding." Emily shook her head. "Nope, but it didn't last. Apparently Barney, he used her, Dad. He just wanted to sleep with her, and once he got what he wanted, he dumped her." I set my cup down, my hand trembling slightly. "He what?" Emily nodded, her expression a mix of pity and disgust. "She told her friend that he basically admitted he only wanted her to prove a point, that he could have her after all these years. Like it was some kind of sick revenge for her rejecting him in college. He strung her along just long enough to get what he wanted, and then he ghosted her." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. Barney had won. He'd destroyed my marriage, humiliated Nora, and walked away without a scratch. A bitter laugh escaped me. "That's something," I muttered, shaking my head. Emily reached across the table and touched my hand. "I know it's a lot to process. I just thought you should know." I nodded, my mind spinning. "Thanks for telling me, Em." That night, as I lay in my motel bed, I replayed Emily's words over and over. Barney had orchestrated the perfect betrayal. He'd torn apart my family and reduced Nora to a shadow of the woman I once loved. And for what? To settle an old score? It wasn't just the cruelty of his actions that got to me. It was the irony. Nora, a grown woman, a supposedly intelligent and capable partner, had let herself be swept up by a man who was practically a caricature of every red flag in the book. She'd fallen for his flattery, his empty promises, and his false charm. And now, here we were, a broken family, a shattered home. And Nora? She was left with nothing but regret and the knowledge that she'd been played. As much as I wanted to stay angry, to blame Barney for everything, I couldn't ignore the truth. Nora had made her choices. She wasn't some naive girl who didn't know better. She was a 48-year-old woman who let herself be taken in by a fantasy. Barney may have lit the match, but Nora handed him the lighter. In the end, he won. But as I stared at the ceiling, I realized something. I didn't care. Let Barney have his twisted victory. Let Nora live with the consequences of her decisions. I was done carrying the weight of their mess. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't my battle anymore. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.